Okay, well, hello everybody. Welcome to the sanctuary. And today we are going to have a fun conversation with Dr. Joshua Bowen. If you are not familiar with Dr. Joshua Bowen, you may know him in one of his other aliases. I tend to know him as the bow tie Bible guy. And I almost put a tie on myself, but I decided not to. Or you may also know him. You may know his wife better than him. Anyway, Megan she's the host of Bart Ehrman's channel, and sometimes she does videos without Bart Ehrman, which is kind of next level. But with that being said, Josh, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do and why you decided to go to school forever in order to get the degree that you have.
Excellent. Yeah. I'm Joshua Bowen. I have my PhD is in the field of ancient Near Eastern studies. So I'm an Assyriologist, which means I study the languages and cultures of ancient Iraq and Syria. But I minored in Hebrew Bible while I was at Johns Hopkins because I went to seminary for a 6-year, 126 semester hour Masters of Theology and Old Testament Studies. So I love Hebrew and Aramaic and Ugaritic and, all the other fun biblical languages. But yeah, it's funny. I started at school because I wanted to become a chaplain in the Air Force. I was in the Air Force for 9 years, and so I wanted to be full-time active duty chaplain. And I found out that I wasn't completely stupid, which was a really weird feeling because I really was very stupid all throughout high school. And so, oh my gosh, I started studying these old languages. Like, oh my, I can do this a little bit. And that sort of snowballed for me. So I ended up doing Greek and then doing Hebrew, then doing Aramaic, and then this other Aramaic, and then doing Akkadian, and eventually went to Hopkins, did Akkadian and Sumerian and some Ugaritic and some other fun stuff. So yeah, but I'm one of the very fortunate few that have the opportunity to do that for so long. And I say this quite a bit. I'm not a super smart person. I just had the opportunity to do it, and there are far more brilliant people on these platforms than I am. And if they had had that opportunity, I'm sure that they would have done far better than what I'm doing now. But I'm glad I had that chance, and so that's what I do here online. Is I kind of play the role as a fact checker to some degree, and when things are in my area of expertise, I kind of go, well, maybe it doesn't mean that, maybe it means this other thing, and here's why. So, but it's nice.
Yeah. So, so you have a PhD in Assyriology. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so you've done a lot of work I think you've done a lot of work anyway in the area of you've done a lot of study in slavery, in particular in the ancient Near East. You wrote a book called Does the Bible Condone Slavery? Is that the
close? Did the Old Testament endorse slavery?
Did the Old Testament endorse slavery? Right. And so with that, why don't we just launch into the subject? So could you let's kind of set the tone for the conversation. Can you explain to those who have not studied the ancient Near East, when we talk of ancient law codes, what is an ancient law code?
There's the $64,000 question right out of the gate. At a very basic level, we have, when you study ancient Mesopotamia, a lot of the writing that we have was done on non-perishable or less perishable material.
Mm-hmm.
So like when you study the Hebrew Bible, you study the New Testament, you end up working with manuscripts, much later manuscripts quite often, because the materials that they wrote on were perishable. So we don't have things like autographs anymore. And so you spend your time sort of like reconstructing, what we think was the earlier forms of these texts. In Mesopotamia, they wrote on clay, they wrote on diorite, so we have 500,000, Akkadian and Sumerian inscriptions and tablets. And so because of that, some of the things that we have, like we have contracts, we have personal letters, we have, literary texts, we have omens, liturgical texts, receipts. I mean, like you name it, we've got it. But one of the genres that we have are these sort of these lists of laws, for lack of a better term. And most of them are structured in a very familiar way to probably anybody that's here that's read the Bible. If this, then that. So
Right.
like if a
Mm-hmm.
person does this, then this will be the punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have these things, going back into the third millennium BCE. And basically there are different forms of them, but often, particularly early on, they're texts that have like an introduction or a prologue where it talks about how great the king is and how he's a really great dude. He's really doing the work of the gods, right? He's Justice, that's his middle name. And and then you have the main body of the composition, which is this collection of laws about all kinds of different topics. And then often you'll have a prologue that says something similar or have some curses. It's all it varies a little bit. So the most famous one that we all, if you've heard of one, you've probably heard of the Laws of Hammurabi. And that is it's in the Louvre currently, and it's a collection on a large, like 2.5, like it's like a 2-meter, 2.5-meter diorite steel. It's black. It has a scene at the top with Hammurabi standing in front of the sun god, the god of justice, whose name is Shamash, and that has all these laws inscribed on it in Akkadian.
How big is this thing? Like how?
Yeah, I think it's 2 meters. If Megan is watching, she'll correct me. It's actually, Josh, precisely, but I think it's about 2 meters tall, somewhere 2.5 meters tall, something like that.
That's all right. My wife fact checks me too, so
you know what? I'm so glad that she does, because she keeps me from saying really stupid things. So, but yeah, it has this one has this 282 laws preserved, so it's just huge thing compared to the others that we have. So what they were exactly, and we can talk about this in more detail if you want, but just as like the bird's eye view, like what these were is still debated. Like, are they the actual laws? Like the way that I always say it, like were there judges sitting at the gate and going, okay, Frank, Jim here stole your sheep. Okay, let me just check the law collection. Okay. All right. Law 112 says what we're supposed to do is, is that how they functioned, or, are they doing something else? There's a combination of things. So, but yeah, that's what we're talking about when we talk about these law collections.
Right. So when we talk about these law codes, Hammurabi was an actual king, right? And so the idea is he gives this law code in order to show how wonderful he is. And how wise he is, and how lucky you are that the gods gave me to clean up your mess. Like, is that kind of the idea of what's going on here?
Yeah, there's no question. If you read, and I was looking for a copy of it here, but of course it's in the downstairs part of the library. But the prologue opens with a lot of it has to do with like, I made sure that the strong did not oppress the weak. And I made sure, that the vulnerable were not, subjugated to the very wealthy and all these things. So that I don't think there's any question. I don't think there are any scholars that would say that these don't, on some level, function as a form of royal propaganda, even if that propaganda is only toward the gods. So, like, one of the things that we see is a good king in the ancient Near East, and this is also true in the Hebrew Bible. A good king is one who acts justly, who takes care of his people, who is a good shepherd. These are all terms that are found throughout, texts in the ancient Near East that talk about kingship. And so this is one of the ways the king can be like, just so you know, Enlil, or Ea, I'm doing it right down here, right? And
Right.
here's this wonderful, set of rulings. This is one of the ways that they're viewed. Maybe they're a collection of rulings that Hammurabi, over the course of his reign, adjudicated. He's like, okay, here's a problem. Sort of like what we see with Moses. People bring the case before him, and he says, okay, here's what we're going to do. It's sort of that. Maybe that's, and there are problems with that view. How much detail you want to go into that, I'll leave up to you. But
right.
But it does seem like that's one of the main points, is to show the king to be the pious, God-fearing, just ruler that he's called to be.
So how many law codes do we have from the from the ancient Near East? How many have we found?
Extant that I can list, you have the laws of Ornama at the around 2100 BCE. You have the laws of Lipit Ishtar, which are early second millennium. Same with the laws of Eshnunna, laws of Hammurabi in the middle of the 18th century. We have a group of texts called the Middle Assyrian laws. We have Hittite laws, which are like Anatolia region. We have the Neo-Babylonian laws, and these are not all, they all don't function exactly the same way. So some of these collections tend to group together a little more neatly. So the whole prologue, epilogue, body of the laws in the middle, some of them fit that category nicely. Later texts, they're maybe not as well preserved, or when they are, they don't seem to fit that precisely. So we can't just say they all function this way, which is why this remains debated exactly how these things, what those texts were doing, and of course the collections that we have in the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
So
when I read your book, and you give some quotes from what we have from some of these kings, things they said in the law code and that sort of thing. I can't remember if it's Hammurabi, but I noticed a lot of the language tends to be from these human kings. It actually reminded me of the Hebrew Bible, because they say things like you had, like, sometimes I brought you out of slavery, like stuff that is almost like a derivative of what you read in the book of Exodus, where God tells the Israelites, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of bondage and slavery, and I've done all these things for you. And then when you read some of these other kings in their law codes, they say similar things about how great they are, how everything was chaos before they were there, and then they came, and then I brought peace. I don't know if they use the word salvation, but did they use the word salvation? Like I rescued you from yourselves, more or less.
Yeah, there's a term for like freedom. It's Amagi in Sumerian, but I don't know that it would translate exactly that way. I'd have to think about that, I guess. But what's interesting about it is that you have this sort of this core constellation of characteristics that describe or befit a good king. And And what's neat about the Hebrew Bible is that those characteristics get sort of removed. But if you think about as those law collections you were talking about, they're all focused on the human king, right?
Right.
That Shamash is saying, or Asher is saying, or Marduk is saying, here, human king, rule, do it right,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the Hebrew Bible, it's flipping that, right? And it's saying, we don't want a human king, right? Human king bad, right? Like it's no
Right.
good,
Right.
right?
For the first half of the Old Testament, kings are
Right.
not good. You don't want a
Yeah,
human king.
that's right. He's gonna subject your citizens to corvée labor, and he's gonna take your daughters to be his men, like
Mm-hmm.
and so God is the one, Yahweh is the one that is described as this just ruler, which is why when we look in places like Psalm 82,
Mm-hmm.
um, Yahweh is the one that ends up inheriting all the rest of the nations from these other deities. The
Right.
reason is he's the righteous ruler. He's the king that's doing it right.
Right.
And so it's really interesting to see how there's consistency,
Mm-hmm.
right? But yet there's very strong, uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to call them polemics. So, but certainly
Mm-hmm.
there's some aspects that are being flipped on their heads, uh,
Right. Right.
which is
So
makes it
as
interesting.
so I'm wondering, like, if a ancient Israelite or whenever, like, I think for sure what most scholars kind of agree on in the Babylonian period, we for sure have most of the Old Testament texts are for sure laid out when they're in Babylonian captivity. So, like, I'm thinking for an ancient Israelite, especially if we go back to, maybe not to the time of Moses, but close to the time of Moses, they probably know about Hammurabi. They probably know about the law codes of some of the Canaanite nations that were there before them. So when they start reading the Torah, and God is acting like these kings, but he doesn't give them a human king. Like, would they have understood this? Like, the gods gave the Canaanites their kings, but Yahweh is our king. Like, is this how they would have understood the law of Moses?
Yeah. Um, very from my perspective, that's a very complicated question.
Mm,
Um, so for a second, like from a historical critical standpoint, we still don't know um, how the Pentateuch, or the wider grouping of the Hebrew Bible, when it ultimately developed, right? So um, there are books just been written by Jonathan Adler a couple years ago now, um, talking about like when do we see what we would consider to be like Judaism
mm-hmm,
developing,
mm-hmm,
and when do we think that there was actually this thing that we would call like Torah,
mm-hmm.
actually in play? And those are like people specialize. They spend their entire careers asking those questions. And I like, that's not my subspecialization. So
Right.
I'll try to be careful about how I couch this.
Well, Megan will correct you later.
Yes, no doubt, no doubt. Um, or she'll call Joel Baden, and Joel Baden will be like, "Josh, what are you doing?" Um, but there's no question that like the prophets are functioning in the 8th century, right? And so you have pre-exilic writing, or at least the traditions are being carried on. Um, how all of that comes into play, whether we have long sources for things like the Pentateuch, or whether we have, that's all still, I think, very much up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
But so that I say all that to say, probably the most difficult thing is to try to ascertain, um, I think you're right. I think a lot of the interaction is taking place during the Babylonian captivity, because there they are. You've got this group of elite, Judean and maybe former Sumerian scribes, or part of the elite class that are there in Judea. In Babylonia, and they're there for damn near 70 years, and so they're experiencing things like the Akitu festival. They're experiencing perhaps even things like scribal training, where something like the laws of Hammurabi.
I need you.
You need me. What do you need?
I spilled some water.
You spilled some water.
Yeah, and then went down my dress to my bed.
Do you want to come say hi? Okay, come say hi very quickly. But I probably need you to find mommy.
Mom, you can't touch me.
I can't touch you because we're here. Come right here so you can say hi.
Hi.
There you are. You're not in camera yet. There you are. This is Nora. Okay.
Hi, Nora.
He says hi. You probably need to go find mommy, okay?
She sounds sorry because she's busy.
Okay, but
I need to make.
This is the fun of live streaming, you guys. This is what it's all about right here.
I'm surprised it's taken this long. Why don't you go find mommy? I promise she can help, okay?
But why? She said
because
if I get up one more time, my brother always go move through Bible.
Okay, tell her I told you to go down, okay? I love you. Those bozos. I'm so sorry.
Problem.
Yeah, so I think that how these elite, captives that are now living in the land and becoming productive there, how they're viewing their captors, how they're wrestling with having to maintain their faith and their practices away from the temple. I think these are it's an environment that I think is sorry, they've I have MS, so it's if there's noise in the background, I get distracted and then I lose my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We can move on to another question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I lost that one with
that's no problem. No problem at all. Okay. Okay, so I think a good question now is a lot of people point out, whether it's at the scholarly level or at the lay level, you hear a lot of people mention the fact that, well, we don't actually know that these laws were enforced. Were they enforced, and how were they enforced? And please use the Sunday school example you use in your book. That was I thought that was a great example. I loved it.
Oh yes. Okay. Now I remember which one you're talking about. Okay. We don't know is the short answer. Part of the issue is for ancient Israel, we don't have a lot of source material. We've got some inscriptions. You've got things like the Gezer calendar. You've got the Salom Inscription. You've got Ostraka. But I mean, as far as textual data, contracts, there's just a dearth of material. So then what we end up having to do is say, okay, we can look at the Hebrew Bible, which is a later text, at least a later preserved text, and that has gone through editorial redaction, and say, okay, how can we understand this text in such a way that it allows us to kind of go back? Now we have a better chance, I think, of trying to look at places like Assyrian Babylonia that actually have source material contemporaneous with this and earlier, and to try to piece together, okay, things change at quite a frenetic pace today when it comes to law, but back then, the culture itself it didn't change nearly that quickly. By the way, that's Raymond Westbrook's frenetic. I would never have come up with frenetic, but I love using it now. A frenetic pace. But so there are different views on what these law collections did. The first one is sort of the standard, the way that people thought for a very long time about this. These are normative legislation. So you got a law that says if a slave, I was going to say slave gets unalived. If a slave gets killed, so it's the TikTok, it'll be coming out now. If a slave gets killed, 30 pieces of 30 shekels of silver, and we move on, right? And that was the law. So just like my example that I was saying, like the judge sitting there and he says, well, the Steely says, so here's what we're going to do. Even if they weren't, necessarily looking back at this thing behind them, scholars, a more nuanced view of that version of that would be like, this is the promulgation of the laws. So even though they're not sitting there looking at them, in the same way that people aren't always, like looking back at a book to enforce a law or something, it's the promulgation of that law. And so I'm not a legal specialist, so forgive me if I don't use those words with great legal precision. But scholars have kind of gone away from this in large part. There still are some that view them that way. A lot of this is because, given the data that we do have from Mesopotamia, the Akkadian and Sumerian text, what we don't have is a lot of correlation. We don't have things like, according to Hammurabi's law, on the contract or something, or even the cases that get decided, they often don't necessarily match up with what we see in those law collections. And there are explanations for that sort of thing, but it's called this into question. So there are kind of different ways that people view this. One of the big turning points came with a scholar by the name of Krauss, which was then picked up by a guy named Jean Bottero. And it was when they noticed that the law collections, this if-then formula, this if-then construction, we call it casuistic law. It's the same construction that we see in other genres of text, most notably in things like omens, or scientific text, or medical text. So it'll say things like, in an omen, for example, if a black cat crosses your path on a Friday, then disaster will befall your house or something.
Right. So that's where the black cats are bad luck thing may have come from, was
right. I mean, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think I gave an example in the book where it says there's a series called Shuma Alu, this Akkadian series, Shuma Alu, which means if a city, but it means or it's this whole list of just omens, terrestrial omens. So like, if there are red ants in the foundation of the house, then this will happen to that house. If there are black ants in the foundation of the house, then this will happen. And then they get kind of crazy if there are like purple ants, if there are yellow ants, if there are like marine polka dotted ants. I mean, not that one, but
yet yellow means something, and red means something, and black means something. Yeah.
That's right. So because of that, scholars started to think, okay, these texts may be doing something other than promulgating or setting up normative legislation. We see these types of texts being copied by in Scribal schools by students. So you see in the Scribal curriculum, that was part of my dissertation, you can see in the Scribal curriculum that you have like legal documents or contracts, these sorts of things, like model contracts that are copied out. And so are these being used as like Scribal exercises? And this led to, and I'll shut up, but this led to the possibility that, okay, maybe these are idealized lists or groupings of laws that the writer or the scribe wished would be the case.
Like ideals we're
That's right.
talking. Yeah.
That's right. And the example that I like to give, and I'm not sure if I gave this one in the book. I my 12-year-old, when she was like 9, she used to draw these really elaborate maps of our house, or like diagrams of our house. And she labeled each room with a certain set of chores that needed to be done, and then assigned a person to each set of chores in our family. Now, the problem is that, like, in the living room, her grandmother, Megan's mom, who was assigned to like sweep every other Tuesday or something. Well, her mom lives in the UK. So, she's not going to be coming over here every other week to sweep. And so, but if somebody were to find that piece of paper 1,000 years from now and be like, oh, okay, so this must have been the way that this house was run.
Right.
Well, that wouldn't be the case. Now, it's possible that we could say that that's how my daughter would have wanted it to be run. But you can't necessarily say that that's how it was run. So when we come to something like Leviticus 25, for example, or Deuteronomy 15, where we have passages that say things like, if you do this thing, for example, in Deuteronomy 15, when you have a debt slave, at the end of the 6 years, you release him and you give him all this stuff, right? Give him food, give him wine, give him grain, give him all these provisions so that he doesn't fall back into poverty. From their perspective, they'd be like, what's that now? Like, the whole point of taking this person as a debt slave was to recoup my losses. Now you want me to just turn around and like hang a bunch of stuff on their neck, right? Like really, really provide for them. And God has to say, if you do this, I will bless you, right? In other words, I will supernaturally intervene. The same thing is true I have a child that is back. Please go back to bed, sweetie. Mommy's going to get very upset with you. I really like you too. I love you. Go back to bed. I'll be in a little bit to check on you, okay? No, sweetheart, you got it. Okay, go ahead. Take it back to bed. Take it back. That's fine, but take it back to bed. I love you. So when we look at passages like Leviticus 25, where it talks about things like every 7th year, let the land lie fallow. The text is explicit that they're going to ask the question, this thing on, God, like, what are we going to eat during the 7th year? And he's like, hey, like, chat, don't worry about it. I got you, right? Like, I'm going to give you such a blessing in that 7th year or in the 6th year that it's going to carry you right on through. You're going to have to like move out old stock to make room for the new stuff,
Right.
So when scholars look at that, they say, okay, was this implemented? I mean, probably not, because this looks like very idealistic, forms of law. And I'm so sorry. I can stop, but you asked me to talk about, and I think it's probably a good example to talk about the Sunday school. There is a way, and I think people like Raymond Westbrook, Bruce Wells, evangelical scholar down at University of Texas, Austin, we're pretty good friends. Super, super nice guy, brilliant scholar. But he's a legal specialist, and his student, Jay Caballero, just defended his dissertation, and he's crazy brilliant. He's a legal specialist as well. Anyway, so I can highly recommend, obviously, both of them for any of these topics. But there's a way that these law collections can represent the way that law was practiced on the ground, but doesn't have to be this type of normative legislation. And like a very clear example of the two that I can think of. The one is the Sunday school one, right? Oh, my love. I love you so much. I can't. You have to go ask mommy, baby. I'm so sorry. Uh, please, please go ask mommy. Will you excuse me for just a second? I'm so
Yeah.
sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. You go ahead. Yeah. So while he tends to his children, and guys, like, this is real life. So this is what we're doing. So yeah. So while he's gone, let me just talk to you a little bit about how the rest of the conversation is going to go. So it has been 35 minutes, and I don't know if you've noticed, but we haven't talked about slavery yet. And part of that's my fault. I'm really nerding out over all of this. I love the ancient Near East. I love talking about ancient law codes, and honestly, the more of Josh's book I read, the worse I kind of got, and so. And so now, and I have a ton more questions for you, Josh, but I am afraid it's going to be way too nerdy, and nobody else but you and me are going to care. And so we probably should actually move on to the main topic. But I'm just I'm really enjoying our conversation, I guess.
Yeah, me too.
I'm trying to say. Yeah. So at the beginning of your book, let's face it, your book is about a fairly controversial topic, especially for those of us in North America. It has particularly touched us in the West. You, in the beginning of your book, you do give a caveat before you kind of jump into your topic, and you do point out that people on both sides of this topic have gone too far in some of their comments and some of their arguments. And you say specifically there's some atheists that have gone too far, and there are some, and I think you're being kind when you say some apologists that have gone too far. Can you maybe let's give the same caveat as we walk into this conversation. What have the apologists, how have they gone too far in some of the things they've said? And how have some of the atheists gone too far in some of the things that they've said?
Yeah. So, I mean, the example that always jumps out to me, maybe before I give the example, let me give a broad principle here. Like obviously, I'm not like a ethical philosopher or something like that. So, what I'm getting ready to say is not coming from any type of precision in that regard. So I'm speaking very colloquially here in these in this context about things like morality and ethics. But I think it's problematic in many ways when we look back at ancient cultures and sort of stand on the moral shoulders of giants that have come before us, and the things that our societies have experienced, and the atrocities that we've seen, and that people, as you were talking about, people among us have undergone, and the lessons that we have had to learn from those things. I think it's problematic when we stand on those shoulders and we say, how could they have been so awful? That's a problem, right? It doesn't mean that we can't ever look back and say that was immoral. I'm not saying that. But I think we need to be careful when we do it. An example that I think rings true is, back in the 50s, a loving father, from a societal standpoint, a loving father would have spanked his child. And now we look at that today. I look at that today and I say, like, I know the damage that, and again, it's not my field of expertise, but I mean, like the reading that I've done psychologically, the damage that can do. And so I would say that that's immoral. And so as a loving father, I would not do that to my kid. But I think it would be unfair of me to say, therefore, that father from the 1950s did not love his child. Like, I don't think it works that way. Right. And I think that's a clear example that most of us would probably get behind. It doesn't mean that there weren't fathers in the 50s that beat their kids that didn't love them. That's not what I'm saying. But I don't think that we can make that we have to be really, really cautious when we make those kinds of judgments. Okay, so with that in the backdrop, I think that if we're coming to an ancient text and we don't have theological presuppositions about it or theological commitments concerning it. So if the example that I always give is, I don't think anybody lies awake at night, thinking, my gosh, like, look what they did to Huwawa in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Like, boy, they killed that creature and he was begging for his life. Man, how can the moral conundrum that, like, nobody does that, right? Because we're not looking at the Epic of Gilgamesh and saying, okay, we need to derive our ethical system from the Epic of Gilgamesh. We do what do they call it? The rake and shovel method, right? Like we kind of rake in the stuff that we think is good, that sort of resonates with how we feel about things and what we think, and we kind of shovel out the stuff that's like, yeah, okay, that's that's bad. That's bad. So the problem, I think, comes in, and I don't know that there's necessarily a way around this. We just need to be careful when we have the conversation, is when a text becomes a yardstick for how we're going to do something. So, many Christian apologists that I've interacted with would say, the Bible says X, therefore that is good. This is what we must do. It's all very often more nuanced than that, obviously. But when you kind of like dig down into it, that ends up, a lot of times you'll get somebody that goes, I guess that was good then, right? Because it's sort of where you end up,
Right.
logically. And so they end up saying things like, the example that always comes to mind is Paul Copan. And Paul's a nice guy. But I mean, when he said that slavery was like LeBron James, playing for the, whatever sports team he plays for. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Because they get traded.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
They
That's right.
belong. Sorry,
That's right.
belong to the corporation or the team. Right.
Right.
That's not the same thing as slavery.
Right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And however, and he's pushed back on me about this, saying that that's not what he meant, which is great. I'm glad that's not what he meant. His correction still seemed to seem like that's what he meant. But anyway, but that's certainly the way that people heard it. So I think, that sort of whitewashing, trying to say it's more like a job. It's like, I think those things are very problematic. That's not letting the text say what it says. On the other hand, demonizing, I think, is really problematic for a number of reasons. There's a phrase that I hear that makes my skin crawl, and it makes Megan's skin crawl, and that is like Iron Age goat herders, right? I just, like, the people that were writing these texts were fucking brilliant, right? Like, yeah, these are the elites. Like, these are the people that are well trained. This isn't a bunch of dummies writing stuff with rocks or something. Like, that's not what this is. These are the well trained people.
I think Tim Mackey calls them literary ninjas.
Yeah,
because they do things 50 pages later that you're like, what did, and they get into your head, but yeah, I'm totally on board with you. People haven't been reading the Bible for 3,000 years because it's a dumb book. Like,
that's right. Yeah. And what's really fascinating, just as a brief aside that I think you'll find interesting. There's a scholar out at where is he at? University of San Diego, I think. Bill Schneidevent, and he wrote a book on like Scribal Guilds recently. I think it was this year. Anyway, phenomenal book. But one of the stories that he tells is he's talking about how when the Northern Kingdom fell to the Assyrians, the new Assyrian Empire, and you had this like migration of people coming down from Israel, from Samaria, down into Judah, and you ended up with this situation essentially where there's like too many people, not enough work. And so if you're familiar with, there's an inscription called the Salom Inscription, and it's like inside of this tunnel. And when he talks about the inscription, it's beautiful. And it's essentially written at a place that's like inaccessible and dark. It's almost like it's a graffito, right? It's almost like, and what he says is like there's good scholarly argument to say that this was written by, like a well-trained, like northern scribe who couldn't find work as a scribe and is out here helping dig this tunnel, doing this like labor. And anyway, like that sort of thing is really fascinating. So they're not these Iron Age goat herders that are out here just like coming up with atrocities to write down. That's not what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They are whatever one's view of inspiration and inerrancy. I think most everybody would agree that God utilized people as they were, the vessels that they were, right? And so he's using Paul, and Paul says through his own mind, right? Hey, Timothy, when you come, make sure you bring the cloak, right? Like,
oh yeah, that's one of my favorite passages, just because, yeah, I'm sure every Christian for the rest of history needs that verse. Yeah,
don't forget the parchments too. Yeah, those are really important. This is scripture.
Yeah. Almost, yeah, like it's an actual, like this is a real letter. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, like.
So I think that in light of that, when I hear people say things like with the slavery discussion, look, Exodus 21, 20 to 21, it's a manual. It's God, it's the writer giving you like a way to beat your slave to within an inch of their life and get away with it. Like that's the intent of the law.
Right.
Like that's silly. Like that's just a silly notion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that people didn't use it that way. Mm-hmm. That's a different statement. In the same way that if I said, to my kid, hey, don't go in the pool, and like they got on a floaty, like on a raft or something, and were like in the pool floating around, and what are you doing? Hey, you said don't get in the pool. Like my intent was not to give them like a way that they could, to craft that law in just the right way so that they could get on a float. And no, they found a loophole, right? They found a way to exploit that text. The point that I was trying to do by saying don't go in the pool was to keep them safe.
Right.
So I think in the same way, all ancient Near Eastern law collections function this way. And it's part of the reason that I wrote chapter 5 with that comparative analysis in the book was to show like these laws are there to protect who they consider to be the vulnerable party in a transaction. And in the case, and I'll shut up after this, I'm so sorry. But in the case of like Exodus 21, 20 to 21, the vulnerable party here is the slave. There's just no question about that. And so what the law is doing, most scholars would agree to this, is that the law is trying to say, all right, masters have to be able to physically discipline their slaves to motivate them and to correct them, whatever. And yet we need to protect the slave from abuse and murder. How do we do that? Right. And so this was what they came up with. That's like from our modern vantage point, if somebody came up on the floor of Congress and said, all right, I'd like to pass a bill that you can beat your slave, but you just can't, beat him for more than moderate correct. So hopefully we would all say, oh my God, get that guy out of here. Right. Like, that's an atrocious law to pass. But that doesn't mean that we can like look back and say, oh, like those are, like those people have malice, malicious intent, or so that we have to be a lot more careful is
Right.
I guess what I'm saying there.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just going to reiterate what I think you're saying, and you can let me know if I'm
Sure.
correct or totally off base or what. But what it sounds like you're saying is, on the one side, some people, particularly some of the apologists, when they have difficult questions about slavery thrown at them, they can polish the brass way too much, and really soften it to the point where it's just not what the text is actually saying. Like, they're being too charitable, while on the other side you can get some of the the basement atheists, is what I call them, the people that are ranting on X. They will say God is evil and he wants to oppress as many people as he can. He's worse than the devil. And so, like, these two things, like, both sides are taking the argument to an extreme. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think that the charitability aspect is probably, and so that I'm clear, I understand both sides of that, right? Which is why I
Right.
say I don't know that there's a way around it. So if a Christian apologist is coming to an atheist and saying, you need to live by the way that I'm interpreting this text, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, then if the atheist says, or the skeptic says, all right, well, if we just go down that path, well, if I buy into or if I accept your view of inspiration or inerrancy, or what have you, of the text, then by your lights, or by our lights today, God is commanding some really evil things, right? Some atrocities. And I
Right.
think that's a legitimate way. I think that's a legitimate way to argue. I think, though, that in the end, we've got to be able to step out of that arena.
Mhm.
And I personally know a lot of atheists that would love to do that, that would love to step out of that arena. Unfortunately, I think they're just in that arena all the time.
Right. Right.
But, like, to be able to say, all right, look, if we're not going to use the laws of the Hebrew Bible to set our morality, right, then, okay, now we can step back and just sort of appreciate it for what it was. And I think that this is why, you mentioned before we went live that I had that debate with Gavin Ortland and Trent Horn. And
Mhm.
I really Gavin's a super nice guy. So is Trent. The interactions that we had have been super nice. I appreciate, again, I disagree with it ultimately, but I appreciate that apologetic argument, because that apologetic argument does not try to, as you said, like, over polish the brass, right? It says, look, the slavery in the Hebrew Bible, it was meeting people where they were. God is working people out of this, but we're not going to try to dress it up into something that it wasn't. Was there some development in the law that improved on the way that law was in the rest of the ancient Near East? Like, here's my argument for that. Again, not that I agree with that, but it still says, even if that's the case, like, this is still bad, right? If we tried to implement this today, this would be bad. It's bad by our lights. But God is meeting people where they were, just like in Matthew 19, and like that. I appreciate that apologetic argument, because at a minimum, it says, I'm not going to try to say this isn't like what it was in its historical context. Yeah. Anyway.
Mhm. No, that's good. So we've gone almost 55 minutes, and we're just really getting into the topic
I know.
now, and it is absolutely not your fault. It is my fault, because I'm just loving this way too much. So, okay. So when it comes to slavery, it would be wise for us to actually define what we're talking about. How do you define slavery in your book?
I'll try to do it from memory. Oh my goodness, sweetheart,
My eye hurts.
your eye hurts. Okay.
I don't know which.
Sorry. Okay, sweetheart, you have to go back to bed. You have to go back to bed. Please go back to bed. Okay, honey, go tell mommy then. You have to go tell mommy. Okay, I love you.
It
We're at
helps
that
that your
stage.
kid. It helps that your kids are cute. Like
Yeah, it
you
does.
get away with, yeah, you get away with it. Yeah.
She's one of two 4-year-old twins, so it's like they just run us. Okay, go to bed. I love you. Yes. How do I define slavery? I'll try to do it from memory, but it's essentially owning another person as property, either temporarily or permanently, where the owner can benefit from the output, but can benefit from the labor and output or whatever of the
Mhm.
the owned individual. Yeah, I think there was a little bit more to it, but it's basically that we're talking about owning other people as property. Debt slavery, if we're trying to be a little bit more precise, so
Mhm.
that we can differentiate a little bit, debt slavery is temporary in nature, and the person retains more rights because it's assumed under the law that they're eventually going to return to their previous status. Chattel slaves tend to lose more rights because they're closer to being dealt with under property law than under family law. So, and that's
Mhm.
pretty standard across the board in ancient Near Eastern law.
Okay. And so in your definition of slavery, the master owns the slave, and I can't remember. Do you say in your book that they own their labor? Like, is that at all connected?
Yeah. So it's tricky, but it's a good tricky, right? It's good to
Right.
nuance, I think, in this way. So with a chattel slave, and again, not just in the Hebrew Bible, this is sort of ubiquitous
Hmm.
in the ancient Near East. Chattel slaves are well. Let me do it the other way. If somebody falls into debt, and they become a pledge, somebody is given as a pledge, or becomes a debt slave of some variety.
Hmm.
It is assumed in most cases, certainly in the law collections, but I think practically as well, that once the
Hmm.
debt is repaid, they're going to go free. So if it's a pledge, somebody that, let's say I take out a loan from you for 10 shekels of silver, and you're like, well, 10 shekels is a lot of money. I need some collateral. I can
Hmm.
take one of my kids and say, all right, Chris, here you go. Susie is going to stay in your house as a possessory pledge until the period of the year is up when I repay the loan, and then I'll get my pledge back. It's assumed for that year that Susie's going to go free again, right? She's going to come back
Hmm.
to her previous status with me. um, and the same is true if I became a debt slave to you. It's assumed that at some point when that debt is repaid, I'm going to be returned to my previous status. And so you couldn't treat um, people that were these temporary types of slaves in
Hmm.
the same way that you could treat someone who was a full chattel slave, someone who was actually movable property.
Right.
Um, so in that sense, a debt slave, it's closer when you say you own the labor of that person, that's closer to true, I think.
Hmm.
Um, where we have to be cautious though is that doesn't then mean it's like a job, right?
Right. Right.
Because the debt slave can't leave. And even people that contractually, that contract themselves, we see at the city of Newsy, for example. We have lots of contracts where a person who is not terribly well off, usually often they're foreigners that are coming into um, this land of Newsy, the city of Newsy, and they say to a wealthy landholder or landowner, look, I will be your slave from now until you die. And then
Mm.
when you die, I will do all the proper funerary rites, and I'll make sure that you get all your, everything's buried and everything gets distributed correctly. But at that time, I will be legally adopted by you. According to our contract, I'll be legally adopted by you. And that will mean that I will get to inherit a share of your estate.
Oh, so
Now,
there are actually cases where a previous slave will actually inherit all the property when the master dies.
that's right. That's right.
Wow. Okay.
Which is why Eleazar, with Abraham, that's sort of like one of those cases that seems, we don't know that that's what was going on there necessarily, but and in fact, I think there'd probably be a good case because it seems like, it doesn't matter. Sorry, that was going to go. But the problem is, or the thing that we need to bear in mind is, like, let's say I enter into that contract. We have these contracts, like we have the tablets. There are such immense penalties on both sides. But there are immense penalties if the slave says, nah, fam, I'm out, right? Like 2 weeks in or something. It ends up being something, I mean, it's just the number, like 60 shekels of gold, or no, it's 60, I think it's some huge, I can't remember, astronomical amount of money that has to be paid to the master if they back out of it, which meant that they couldn't, right? For all intents and purposes, they couldn't, because then they would be taken as a debt slave. I mean, as a full chattel slave anyway. So that's, even though many of these arrangements, these instances of debt slavery or indentured servitude were legally voluntary, that doesn't, we've got to be careful that we don't try to push that too far, because if you look at and then I'll be quiet, I'm so sorry, but in 2 Kings 4:1 with Elisha and the widow woman, who is one of the widows of the sons of the prophets, she says, Elisha, help me, because my husband took a loan and now he's died, and the creditor is coming to take my 2 children away.
Right.
Well, we would have to say that was a voluntary contract that was entered into. So she, as a member of the household, the paterfamilias, made that decision. And so, like, that was voluntary. Yet
voluntary, but you have no other option. Right. Yeah.
So
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So basically, in the ancient world, it's my understanding, almost anybody could become a slave at some point. Like, if the emperor lost a war, he could become a slave to the enemy army, or the king he's fighting, that type of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And with when it comes to debt slavery, I mean, if you have a bad crop one year, or if you make a couple bad business deals, you go into debt, and you don't get to declare bankruptcy in the ancient world. That was not a thing, and you have to repay your debt some way. And so, like, any number of ways somebody could become a debt slave. Now, the Hebrew Bible gives it creates a limit. You can't take a debt slave for his whole life. At maximum, it's 6 years.
Right.
And then in the 7th year, the debt slave has to go free. Do we see similar laws in the other law codes when it comes to limiting the years of labor for debt slaves?
Yeah, like Laws of Hammurabi 117 has a similar this is just sort of common across the board. They have similar things that they have laws about, and they have similar ways of adjudicating them, and they have similar like penalties or decisions or outcomes or whatever. So it's a similar law that says you can keep them for 3 years. You have to release them in the 4th. So, but it's the same principle, right? You because the way that debt slavery worked, and not just then, right? I mean, it would continue this way too, I'm sure, in parts of the world today.
Today, in certain countries, people are debt slaves for life.
Yeah.
And sometimes their children are debt slaves for life.
That's right. And because if you're the creditor, let's say I owe you $1,000, you're like, all right, you can come work it off.
Hmm.
Oh, great. So you say, all right, well, you serve me and I'm going to credit you like $100 a year. You're like, okay, great. um,
Yeah, but
but
you have to rent. You have to rent the
rent's going to
tools.
be $50,
Yeah.
and food,
Uh-huh.
that's going to be. And so after,
Yeah.
a year, you're like, oh my God, I'm more in debt than when I started.
Mhm.
And so this was to limit that. And this is like, there are a couple of things that you see in the Hebrew Bible. You see them in the wider ancient Near East. There's this declaration of freedom in Deuteronomy 15. It's called the Shemitah. It takes a slightly different form in Leviticus 25, but you have this. It's essentially like a reset button for the economy. Usually, it's limited to citizenry, but it's like, okay, everybody that's got a debt, everybody that's got a loan, everybody that's been taken as a debt slave, everything just gets reset. We declare a release.
Mhm.
The novel thing that you see in the Hebrew Bible is that in the wider ancient Near East, like kings, Babylonian kings, when they would come to the throne, they would often, as part of their like first, thing that they declared, they would declare freedom. They would declare, so it wasn't this like regular thing. It was just, maybe when they wanted to curry some really good favor, or they just wanted to spur the economy or whatever.
Mhm.
They would do that. In the Hebrew Bible, whether it happened or not, right? I mean, the Hebrew Bible goes, I think, to great lengths in places like the book of Daniel to say that they didn't do it, right? Which is why they went into captivity. Same in
Right.
Jeremiah.
Right. Part of the
Um,
reason for the wrath of God
that's
is
right.
they're not letting the slaves go when they're supposed to.
That's right.
And even I think there's even verses even saying that you're not letting the crops grow on
That's
the
right.
Sabbath year.
Yeah.
He takes it so far that he cares about the land,
Yeah.
not just the human slaves, but even just they're overworking the land itself, and
Yeah.
it needs to rest.
And this is what's so we could go off on like a huge tangent on this, but like when you think about the way that Jeremiah tries to explain the 70 years
Mhm.
captivity, he's going to say that you were in the land for like what ends up being like close to 500 years,
Mhm.
uh, and every seventh year you were supposed to let the land lie fallow. So 7 times 70 is 490. So like the reason I'm ejecting you from the land is so
Mhm.
that the land can have its rest for its 70 years that you didn't let it have it.
Right.
And
The
then
idea
Daniel
is
picks up
that
on this. Yeah,
yeah, no, sorry. The idea from Jeremiah is God is giving the land the years you owe it.
that's right.
It's kind of the idea, yeah.
That's right. And this is
Mhm.
what Daniel picks up on. It's such cool intertextuality that you see in
Mhm.
biblical interpretation. But um, yeah, and I know you know this, but like for people watching that may not, like the writer of Daniel is looking at Jeremiah 25, seeing the 70 years, and then tying that to Leviticus 26 with the if you don't obey me but continue to rebel, I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. And so he says,
Mhm.
okay, well, 7 times more. Leviticus 25 is where the Sabbath year rest is shows up. 7 times more for your sins. Well, we're supposed to go into captivity for 70 years, but 70 times 7, that'd be 490. That's why it's taking so long, right?
Right.
For us to come out of this. So
Right.
really fascinating stuff. But
Mhm.
yes,
Well, and
sorry.
then if you want to get really nerdy, you can take that into the New Testament and people do math and oh, you're getting close to the birth of Christ at this point. So Christ is the fulfillment of the everything, right? It's
Who wrote that? Was it Honer? Oh man, that's terrible that I can't remember that. Sorry, I won't rack my brain trying to. I can see the cover of the book.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, sorry.
Yeah. No, just yeah, there's like when you talk about intertextuality, like
Yeah,
it's absolutely everywhere for sure.
yeah, it's fun stuff.
For sure. So okay, so there's debt slavery, and the Hebrew Bible does address debt slavery.
Yeah.
We have chattel slavery. So this is the type of slave that can be passed on to multiple generations, and they have less rights than the debt slave will have. And is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. The difficulty, I think, with the Hebrew Bible specifically is it seems like, I think most scholars would say that it seems like most of the laws that are about slavery focus on debt slavery. And so how debt slaves are to be handled or to be treated, laws concerning them. That doesn't mean that there isn't chattel slavery, because there are clearly laws about chattel slavery, but it doesn't go into the kind of detail that it does for debt slavery. So when we reconstruct things like, well, how can, if, for example, if Exodus 21:20 to 21:26 to 27 is about debt slaves, so if you beat one of them to death, or if you put out an eye or a tooth, then they get to go free. If that's about debt slavery, which is what most scholars think it is, well, then what about the physical treatment of chattel slaves? Well, we don't have like specific things said about that, right? There are scholarly arguments. There are some people I can think of off the top of my head that hold to this position. I'm a little skeptical of it, where when the text says, but you can't treat your fellow Israelites this way, that means that by implication you can treat. I'm writing a commentary on Leviticus right now, and that chapter is really complicated to talk about, and what exactly it means there. But the point is, when we reconstruct what chattel slaves can be treated like, a lot of times we're having to go to the wider ancient Near East, where we have this sort of more of a plethora of data to try to reconstruct. And there are several laws where it'll say things like, if someone is a pledge, for example, if I give my daughter as a possessory pledge to you during the period of a loan, and you say to yourself 6 months in, boy, I'd like to give Susie to my son as a wife. You can't just do that. You have to ask my permission first. And then if I grant it, then she essentially gets converted into, and I get full credit for, her value gets essentially credited. God, that sounds so bad. Credited to my debt. So if we agree she's worth, whatever, doing this would be worth like 15 shekels of silver or something, that gets credited toward my debt, and then you can give her as a wife. And if I'm dead, then you have to ask my children, or my sons specifically, if you can do it. So there are certainly laws that seem to imply, like, or they say outright, if somebody gets taken as a full chattel slave from a pledge, then you can pull their hair out, you can pluck their, I can't remember, you can brand their ear. And it's not just, these aren't like torturous things that they're doing. They're for marking, they're for branding them.
Right. Yeah, I think one is you pierce their ear, and then that's a sign that they belong to somebody. Yeah. That's right. And there are special hairdos, hairstyles. We have laws and laws of Hammurabi that talk about if a barber cuts the hair of a slave, and can't prove that, like, his master, his owner or whatever, told him to give him that haircut or whatever, then there are serious penalties for that, because ostensibly you're trying to steal that slave. Anyway, so yes. Sorry. Yeah. No, that's good. So Leviticus, go back to Leviticus 25 for a minute here. When we talk about, so in the Hebrew Bible, it says that debt slaves are to be released after 6 years. I think in Hammurabi, debt slaves are released in 3. Right. In Leviticus 25, it talks about the year of Jubilee, right? In which all of the debt slaves are to be set free. Right. All the debt is canceled. That's right. And if the creditor took your father's land,
Yep.
On the year of Jubilee, you get your dad's land back.
That's right.
Is anything like this done in any of the other code laws?
So the word that's used in Akkadian Undararu carries a similar notion. I have not looked to see how far it goes as far as the returning of land. So I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. That's a really good question, though, and thanks a lot for giving me homework. Now I got to go look it up.
You're very welcome, my friend.
But that is precisely correct.
Tag me when you do a video on it.
Yeah, right. I'll be like, I need to thank Chris as a shout out here, making me do this. No,
no, I meant because I want to know the answer. That's
I'll do both. No, but that's one of the really interesting things about Leviticus 25 is that it's part of what's called the Holiness Code. Scholars refer to it as part of the Holiness Code. And it looks like chronologically, it's a later text that is responding, for lack of a better term, to the Covenant Code in Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15, the Deuteronomic Code. And so in Leviticus 25, one of the ways that it responds is it essentially says it's almost like the early form. It doesn't say this, but it's almost like an early form of, you have heard it said, you may take him as a debt slave, but I say, right? It's almost that same
really,
yeah, that same feeling, because
that's interesting,
because what the law says, and it uses verbiage that is, it connects it to, there's a brilliant article by named Bernard Levinson, The Birth of the Lemma, where he talks about this, and he goes to painstaking detail to show all these connections anyway. But what it seems to be saying pretty clearly is, it used to be in these other collections that we have that you could take an Israelite as a debt slave, right? You had to release him in the 6th year, but in the 7th year, but you could do it. No more. You're not allowed to keep Israelites as debt slaves anymore. Instead, you have to treat them as hired workers and release them then in the year of Jubilee. So this is seemingly, at least as far as the way the text is presenting it, a pretty big benefit for the individual the Israelite that falls into debt.
Right.
So that's noteworthy, I think.
Okay, that's noteworthy. Okay, good. So okay, so we need to talk about this, but it's super uncomfortable. The third type of slavery is sex slavery. And in the ancient world, that was a thing. Unfortunately, today, in some countries, that is very much a reality. So when it comes to this topic, maybe, like, I guess my question is, like, when we hear the word concubine, I know it's some people, they say a concubine is a woman that's a part of the family, but she doesn't have the status of being a wife. Like, if we're just honest about this, are concubines sex slaves, or are they like a secondary wife?
There is a really, I promise I'm answering your question. There is a really good section of, Bernard Jackson wrote a book. It's this like tome, and it's called the Mishpatim, the Wisdom Laws, and it's talking about Exodus 21 in particular. But he goes, because of the discussion of the Amma in 21:7 through 11, it kind of goes into a lot of these other passages, like Deuteronomy 21:10 to 14 with the captive bride, those sorts of passages that discuss this. The short, I guess the short answer here is that it's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum.
So yeah, there isn't this, and this isn't just in the Hebrew Bible. Like, this seems to be pretty ubiquitous.
Right.
You have people, you have women that are on one end of the spectrum, like a primary wife.
Mhm.
And then on the other end, you have just a straight female slave that is used for one of the things that she's used for is sex. And then you've got gradations in between. So one of the ways that we sort of try to get at this, and this is not my area of specialization, so I'll tell you how, you know, what I know about it, and then I can give people resources if they're interested in it. One of the ways that we try to ascertain where, like, what modern category we might try to assign them is how the text describes things about their legal status. So, you know, someone who is a wife, like a primary wife, is going to have certain rights that won't you won't see things in the law like we see in Deuteronomy 21:10-14, where it says, if you no longer like her, you got to let her go where she, you know, wherever she wants, because you've you know, deflowered her. That's language that's not really appropriate for just as a full wife, right?
Right.
The same in Exodus 21:7-11 with the Amah. You know, the text says, if you no longer have a liking for her, but you don't provide her with these three things, the food, the oil, and whatever else this third thing is, then you have to allow her to be redeemed. You can't sell her to a foreign people. Like, that's not something you would say about a full wife. You can't sell her. Like, you wouldn't have to say that. Of course you can't sell her. What do you mean you can't sell her?
Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So, but that means that there ends up being this sort of like, what do we call them? And so when I talk about these things, it's sort of like, you'll have things like a slave wife is one of the ways that I try to categorize them. Or you'll have secondary wives, or you'll have concubines, or you'll have like, and again, these are modern categories that we're sort of imposing upon the text. The Hebrew Bible does have some words that seem to get close to that, but they're not used often in these contexts. So then we just sort of have to, kind of have to say, well, here's the constellation of characteristics that seems to go along with the status of this person. What would we call that today? That's sort of how it works out.
Okay. So, and I think another concept that I think modern people aren't really familiar with is this idea that in the ancient world, children actually had worth. And what I mean by that is, your land, you don't want your land going to the wrong family, right? Because that means wealth is going to your neighbors or somebody outside of your family. And so having children was a big deal in the ancient world, partially because if you had sons, you had free laborers. You didn't have to pay your laborers then, because your sons are going to, whatever it is, work on the farm or do the family business. So sons actually had monetary meaning. And daughters also were particularly, you know, like, let's not beat around the bush here, but a woman's virginity was worth money to her father.
Yeah.
That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And one thing I found really interesting, there's I can't remember the exact verse off the top of my head, but there is a verse in the Mosaic Law that says if a father sells his daughter as I think it says as a slave.
Yeah,
and
it's
it
Exodus
uses
21:7. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it uses this really interesting language. Now, I'd heard some evangelical scholars use the argument. They're actually talking about a marriage here. Is he's giving his daughter in marriage to somebody. Maybe he's poor. Maybe he doesn't have a dowry to give. And now in your book, I was kind of surprised. You mentioned the same verse in your book, and I think you kind of come to the same conclusion that this is actually describing a marriage.
Yeah. Again, I think it's one of those like marriages on the spectrum, because that is one of the that's one of the ones where the language seems to be a little off for, that's the one that says you can't sell her to a foreign people.
Right.
It also shows up in Exodus 21. I mean, in Deuteronomy 21, that language is a little bit different, but so yeah, it's probably somewhere between like a secondary wife and a concubine. Scholars, sort of debate how to classify that sort of thing. The text itself says, if he takes another, and a lot of English translations will say if he takes another wife to himself, but the text doesn't say another wife, it says another, and it's using the word, if anybody knows anything that's listening about like Hebrew or Greek, it's using that word another, but it's like a substantive, it's a feminine form, so it's another feminine something, and what it almost certainly means is another ama, another female slave.
Okay.
Right. So
so you're saying the word slave isn't in the Hebrew, but the word wife also is not in the Hebrew. Is that what you're saying?
The word slave is in the Hebrew.
Okay.
But the problem is that I don't think anybody debates whether she's sold as a slave. The question is, it seems like it almost certainly gets her status elevated. The reason is not as humanitarian as we might think. One of the things that scholars have pointed out, and I think Bernard Jackson says it really well in his book, is that both the male slave in Exodus 21:2-6 and the female slave in verses 7 through 11 are being used for their sexual capacities, their reproductive capacities. So the male slave is being used essentially to make more slaves, right? That's why the text talks about if he's given a wife and they have children, that the children and the wife remain the property of the master and he can go free by himself. So he's being utilized, amongst other things, for his sexual reproductive capacities. She is as well, right? She's being sold as an ama, but the text seems to say either the person that buys her is designating him for himself or for his son. You know what it's really close to? Now that I'm sitting here thinking about this, I don't remember which prequel it was, but the Star Wars where Anakin's
now
mother,
you're going to offend everybody now. Bring up the prequel. Yeah.
Sorry. But where Anakin's mother is purchased by the guy whose name I can't remember now. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
when you watch that
family, yeah,
I don't know, but they're definitely trying to portray this guy as like a good guy, but it's done still in such a way that you're like, like, okay, yeah, he marries her, but I mean, like, there's no way that she can consent to that, right? Even though that might be the best situation that she could hope for, it's still icky, right? It's still icky.
For sure. Yeah.
So, but again, in the same way, I think we have to make sure that we're nuancing this. As long as we're not trying to like hold up this text as, hey, this is how we should be doing things today, right?
Right.
Yeah, we need to make sure we nuance this in a way that says like, okay, what was the context in which this happened? What's the law trying to do? Yeah, it's obviously icky. We wouldn't want to do that today. But are these like what is the law's intent? Anyway.
Right. The law's intent. Yeah. So that brings me to another question in regards to so in the ancient world, most marriages were planned by the parents. Typically, both the male and the female, they were getting married whether they wanted to or not. Right? Is that somewhat accurate?
I mean, certainly, a husband had more choice in the matter
Right.
than
Right.
the woman or the bride. But yeah, I mean,
Mhm. So
certainly that
in
wasn't always the case.
right, yeah. So if like I'm being a little bit technical here, by using our definition of slavery, that the master owns the labor, owns the person, by that definition, is all marriage in the Old Testament technically sex slavery?
Yeah, I mean, this is why this is why um, this stuff can get really, really complicated really, really quickly because in a very real sense, yes,
Mm,
right? Because by our modern terms, by our modern definitions,
mhm,
consent requires like enthusiastic approval.
mm,
And and if you it requires you to be able to make a choice, a negative choice, right? To not do X and have no negative repercussions because of that,
mhm,
right? And again, this isn't my area of expertise. Like I'm not like a consent expert or something, but
mm,
given my understanding of that, you have to have enthusiastic consent in order to have it. Um, so yeah, I mean, if those factors aren't there, I mean, by our modern definition, but this is the reason that when I put in the book, the section on sex slavery, I caveat it to say, look, there are emic categories and there are edit categories. Emic categories are essentially like, how would they have defined this? How would
mhm.
they have viewed this? And
Right.
a good example of this, and I promise I'll be fast. I just looked at the time, so I promise I'll be fast. Um, is when we think about rape, right? We have to be careful when we go to passages like Deuteronomy 21:10-14 with the captive bride and say, this is describing rape. Yes, by our modern standards, no question, right? There is no way that a captive bride under duress like this can make informed consent. She just can't, right? The
Mhm,
power dynamic, the stress that she'd be under from the situation of watching everybody in her village killed, probably including her family, obviously including her family. um, so by our lights, by our modern definition, absolutely that's what that is. The question is, if you were to go back in time and say, is this rape? They would say, my God, no. What do you mean? No, that's not rape. Look, I'm marrying her, right?
right,
So
right.
we we just have to be at least in certain contexts of these discussions, we want to try to be nuanced about that. Um,
Right.
and I think that's really important to be able to distinguish between a category that they would use, which I don't think that they would say that's a sex slave. I don't think that that's how they would categorize that.
Mhm.
I think they would use that they would not think of it in that particular way, assigning it that category. I think they would do something else.
Right.
Um, so anyway, I think just being nuanced about that. I keep using that word, but I
Yeah, no,
think
and
it's
I think
important.
I think that's wise. I I mean, even if I mean, coming from our culture where, like me and my wife and I, we actually liked each other and loved each other and we actually decided together that we wanted to get married.
Right.
Uh, there are still arranged marriages in other countries, and for a lot of us, we think like that's horrendous. Like how could something? It's all we almost think it's barbaric coming from our worldview. But if you actually meet somebody from the Middle East, or if you actually meet somebody from India, a lot of them they have happy lives with the person, and it doesn't seem from their worldview they don't seem to look at it as such such a demonized way that we tend to look at it from our worldview? Is that kind of how we should look at this? Like
I mean, I think in that circumstance, I think the difference would be like if we can't meet people from the past, at least not yet. There's no flux capacitor that I know of. So one day, no.
Don't say
so,
that. Don't
yeah.
say that. All this might disappear.
Right. Oh my gosh.
It might be 10 times worse.
Oh shit. But so we can't like go back and say, hey, you shouldn't do it this way. Right. And so because of that, I think it changes the dynamic about how I think about it. One of the things that I'd want to be very careful about in this discussion is like people adapt to the stresses in the societies in which they find themselves. So I mean, I think that in the same way, you and I could go back to the antebellum South and find like a happy slave family, that's serving them as a like that's true. That's true. Right. But that can't
make it okay.
Yeah, that can't be the determining factor. And again, I'm not an ethicist, but like that can't be, by my lights, that can't be the determining factor, because we've got to be able to say, okay, I get that you guys are happy in it. I'm glad that it's worked in your situation. But the thing is, you may not realize to the woman, obviously, you may not realize that what it even means to have a choice, to make your own decision. And if you were to actually be exposed to that, my God, this might be totally different. It's like, it's a funny example. It's like I had somebody in a church. I pastored a church for a number of years, and I had a guy say to me like, I don't know why the pastor needs to know Greek and Hebrew. Bible's written in English. And it's like, yeah, that's true, right? But it's a lot like somebody that's never learned to read. They could have
King James was good enough for Paul. It should be good enough for us.
Good enough for Paul. Oh my gosh, I wish I could say I've never heard that, but and not ironically. See, that's what makes it so bad. That's what makes it so bad. Oh God. Okay, sorry. I'm going to stop rambling on because I looked again at the clock, and there's actually a 4-year-old sitting next to me who's been here for far too long, and I've got to get him in bed.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up then. With that being said, so the title of this video is "Does the Mosaic Law Endorse Slavery and or condone slavery?" Well, it doesn't really matter. I mean, whichever word you go with. And so in your book, you come to the conclusion that it does. I think that is
I would say that it did.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I say did is I don't think it's a text that should be, obviously, I don't think it's a text that should be used to endorse it now. So actually the wording in the title was, I chose it very, very precisely. I didn't say in the Hebrew Bible. I said in the Old Testament, because I don't, at least today, post antebellum South, there are still some, but there are not many that I have met, Christians, that would say, yeah, Christianity is pro-slavery, right? I don't know of many that would say that, which is wonderful, right? And so I think that there's a difference between the Old Testament did in its time endorse the social institution of slavery. But if I had said does, I think that would sort of incorporate Christian theology. And I don't think that Christian theology today does. So
well, and
if that makes sense.
and if we can't go any longer, but I would love to have you back on and talk about the New Testament. I would love to have that conversation with you.
Awesome.
So when I read your book, just to wrap things up, when I read your book, I really came out of it pretty much agreeing with you. However, it seems like there is a caveat, because what I don't think the Old Testament does is I don't think it condones it in the sense of saying this is the ideal for all of time. Like when I read it, I don't see that, and I think you, in our conversation, I think you would agree with that.
I think that in the view of the writers under a critical historical perspective,
Mm-hmm.
they were writing what they thought was right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that under Christian theology, and that's what I think you're probably looking at this through the lens of Christian theology.
Yeah, for sure.
We didn't get to your position on it, but I suspect, well, I don't know if it sounds like you hold to a position similar to what Gavin Ortlund would hold, but like God is sort of meeting people where they are and saying this is where it's got to be for right now, but we're moving incrementally away from it. Maybe if it's not the ideal for all time, then something better is coming or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of my short version of my position is my position is that in the Old Testament, particularly in the law, God sets up a lot of structures, such as the temple. He does eventually give in and gives them kings. He gives them the sacrificial system. But in the New Testament, theologically, all that stuff comes crashing down.
Right.
God becomes the king of Israel through Jesus. Right. Jesus ends the temple system. He ends the sacrificial system. And so there's, to me, my view is that the Old Testament, God is trying to limit the damage that's being done. And then in the New Testament, you see a push forward, and there's a progression. That's basically my view in a nutshell.
Yeah. So I think from that vantage point, through that lens, that's a perfectly reasonable way to read the Old Testament law, because I think it's through that Matthew 19 lens, right? And it's saying, look, Deuteronomy, law and divorce, hardness of heart, right? And so this is what I gave you for that time to get you where you were, but it wasn't always going to be that way. And again, I think that's a perfectly fine or reasonable way to view the text. I think there are problems with it. We could talk about it on another stream.
I'd love to have another conversation with you and talk about this stuff. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowen, for joining me on my channel.
Thank you for having me.
I absolutely loved our conversation. I really enjoyed your book. If any of my people are watching, go check out Digital Hammurabi and all the things. Thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm gonna drop out just because he's not gonna go back to bed.
No, that's fine.
Thank you very much.
This is the end. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Right. Thanks. Bye. Bye. All right. Well, like I said, this is the end. Thank you guys so much for participating in the conversation. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I totally just blocked out your name. Thank you so much, Nick Bracing, for setting this up. I really enjoyed our conversation. And so one of the reasons why I was excited to have this conversation is because I really believe in scholarship. I am a pastor in a rural church in Canada. I believe in biblical scholarship, and I really do think that sometimes, well, not even sometimes, what tends to happen on the internet is we get into our own silos. Atheists tend to get atheist content, like that's just the way it is. Evangelicals tend to get evangelical content because that's really what the internet does. If I like stuff, YouTube will throw me more of the stuff I like, and that's just the way it is. And sometimes I think we get into our silos and we are unable to experience the other side actually has good stuff to say. And I really believe that. And I learned a ton from Josh's book. And so I really think this is important. I think both sides need to be conversing. We need to be charitable. We need to be kind with each other. And, you know, like, and we really have to just come to the understanding they have smart things to say. And probably what's going on, there are biases on both sides, and the truth is probably in the middle somewhere. And so I'm was more than happy. I'm really glad he was able to come on. He's a really nice guy. He's really likable. Thank you guys so much for watching. I think this is a really good thing, being able to bridge different views and to be able to come to some understanding in our search for truth. I really believe that's important. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And we will catch you guys in the next video.